You need to leave now.
What?
I'm just having coffee.
Manager says you're making people uncomfortable. You're trespassing.
I already told you to leave. People like you come in here, use the free Wi-Fi, and don't buy anything. You're scaring away the customers. Get up and get out, now. Officer, with all due respect, I am a paying customer. My order is on the receipt, and your jurisdiction doesn't include deciding who can or can't be in a private establishment that I'm paying to use. Jurisdiction? You learn a new word today, champ. I'm the law here, and the law is telling you, scram, or I'll take you in for loitering and disorderly conduct. Your choice. This is the audio-visual and procedural record of the incident that occurred on May 14, 2023 at the Gilded Bean Coffee Shop in Washington, D.C. The event documents the interaction between FBI Special Agent James Carter and Patrolman Brian Miller of the Metropolitan Police Department. Officer Miller's intervention, motivated by unprovoked racial bias, resulted in his termination from the force, a civil lawsuit, and a total documented financial loss of $4,250,000. The evidence, captured by multiple cameras, is irrefutable. At 3:32 p.m., the atmosphere inside the Gilded Bean was a study in urban tranquility. The air smelled of dark roast coffee and steamed milk, punctuated by the soft clatter of ceramic on wood and the low hum of conversation. Special Agent James Carter sat at a small table near the rear, a position that afforded him a strategic view of the entrance without drawing attention. His focus was absolute, his gaze occasionally shifting from the encrypted data stream on his high-end laptop to the street visible through the large plate glass window. He was in the midst of a discreet surveillance operation, a delicate phase of a national security case, monitoring a person of interest 2 blocks away. His presence in the coffee shop was an essential piece of his operational cover, a successful professional working remotely, blending seamlessly into the affluent D.C. neighborhood. To maintain this cover, he had purchased an espresso and a bottled water, the transaction totaling exactly $9, paid via a nondescript credit card and logged in the establishment's electronic fiscal records. At 3:47 p.m., the delicate equilibrium of the scene was broken. The bell above the door chimed, announcing the arrival of Officer Brian Miller. The security camera, a Hikvision Lotto D-2CD2143GO-I, mounted at the northwest angle, captures his entrance with cold digital clarity. His eyes swept the room, his gaze gliding over 6 other patrons, all of them white, all of them using laptops, some with empty cups long since finished. He ignored them all. His attention locked onto Agent Carter, and his path toward the back table was immediate and direct. He operated not on observed evidence of wrongdoing, but on a deeply ingrained and discriminatory premise, that a black man in designer clothes using a premium laptop in this part of the city was, by his flawed definition, a suspicious individual. His approach was hostile from the first step, a confrontation searching for a pretext. Officer Miller's voice, a low growl laced with unearned authority, cut through the ambient cafe noise. "I already told you to leave." His words were not a request, but a command, delivered with the finality of a verdict. He stood over Agent Carter's table, his shadow falling across the laptop screen, a deliberate act of intimidation. "People like you come in here, use the free Wi-Fi, and don't buy anything. You're scaring away the customers. Get up and get out, now." The phrase, "people like you," hung in the air, thick and unambiguous. The accusation was a pre-written script in Miller's mind, one he had likely run countless times, and the evidence before him was irrelevant. Agent Carter did not immediately look up. His training had conditioned him for moments like this, to control the space by controlling his own reactions. He methodically saved his document, a single keystroke closing a sensitive file, before slowly raising his head. His eyes met Miller's, and his expression was one of mild professional curiosity, utterly devoid of the fear or anger the officer expected. "Officer, with all due respect, I am a paying customer." Carter's voice was even, measured, the tone one might use to clarify a minor point in a business meeting. He gestured with a single finger toward the small white paper receipt lying next to his empty espresso cup and half-full bottle of Fiji water. My order is on the receipt. And your jurisdiction doesn't include deciding who can or can't be in a private establishment that I'm paying to use. The response was a masterclass in de-escalation, factual, respectful of the uniform, but not the man's baseless assertion, and legally precise. It was also, to a man like Brian Miller, the equivalent of throwing gasoline on a fire. The officer's face, captured in high definition by the counter-facing camera, contorted into a smirk of disbelief. Jurisdiction? You learn a new word today, champ. I'm the law here, and the law is telling you, scram, or I'll take you in for loitering and disorderly conduct. Your choice. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, threatening whisper, his breath smelling of stale coffee. The other patrons were now acutely aware of the confrontation. A young woman near the window lowered her phone slightly, its camera lens now aimed directly at the scene.
An older man in a suit folded his newspaper with deliberate slowness, his attention fixed. Agent Carter's calm was a rock against which Miller's aggression crashed and broke. He made no move to stand, his posture relaxed but ready. He was processing variables, the risks to his ongoing operation, the public setting, the officer's escalating instability. He had to end this, but on his terms, and without compromising his mission. "Officer, you are creating a disturbance," he stated, his voice remaining level. "I have provided proof of purchase. I am violating no laws. I suggest you verify the facts before you continue down this path." He was offering an exit, a chance for Miller to retreat without losing face. But Miller was too far gone, his ego irrevocably engaged. He saw the offer not as a lifeline, but as a taunt from someone he had already judged and condemned. He pointed a thick finger at Carter's chest. "I'm the only one who states the facts here, pal. The fact is, you're a freeloader pushing your luck. Now, I'm not going to tell you again. Get up." Miller's hand moved from a pointing finger to a clenched fist at his side. The digital clock on the wall read 3:49 p.m. The entire interaction had lasted less than 2 minutes, but for Officer Miller, it was time enough to dismantle a 20-year career. He was about to make a physical move, a fatal error that the law and the cameras would not forgive. What would you do if you were in the agent's shoes, facing an officer who refuses to listen to reason? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more documented cases of karmic justice. The officer's arrogance metastasized into action. Ignoring Agent Carter's final calm warning, Brian Miller made the decision that would seal his fate. He reached out and grabbed Agent Carter's shoulder. His grip intended to be a show of force, a physical punctuation to his verbal commands. "Get on your feet," he snarled, the fabric of Carter's expensive jacket bunching under his knuckles. The act was a bright, uncrossable line. It elevated the incident from a verbal harassment to a physical assault. The other patrons audibly gasped. The manager, a young man in his 20s, emerged from the back room, his face pale with alarm, but he remained frozen behind the counter, intimidated by the uniform. Agent Carter's reaction was almost imperceptible, yet it was a study in absolute control. He didn't flinch, he didn't resist. His entire body remained still, except for his eyes. He slowly, deliberately lowered his gaze to the officer's hand on his shoulder, held it there for a full 2 seconds, and then raised it back to meet Miller's enraged stare. The message was clear. You have made a grave mistake. The silent rebuke was more powerful than any shout. It was the calm of a predator, not the fear of prey. For a brief moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Miller's face, a primal instinct warning him that the man he was accosting was not what he seemed. But that instinct was immediately bulldozed by years of unchecked authority and ingrained prejudice. He interpreted the lack of physical resistance as weakness, the silent stare as defiance. He tightened his grip. "You think you're tough? You think you're above the law?" The security camera's directional microphone captured every word, every strained syllable, preserving it for the inevitable internal affairs investigation. "I am the law, and you are under arrest for disorderly conduct and resisting." Carter's mind was a flurry of calculations. His primary objective was still the protection of his surveillance operation. A public arrest, even a wrongful one, would compromise it completely. His secondary objective was to de-escalate, but that option had been vaporized by the officer's physical assault. That left only the tertiary protocol: reveal his status and assume federal jurisdiction over the incident. It was a step he was loath to take, as it would draw unwanted attention. But Miller had left him no other viable path. He had to end this now. "Officer," he said, his voice still impossibly calm, "I am going to say this one last time. Remove your hand and walk away. I am not the person you think I am, and you are interfering with matters far beyond your pay grade." The warning was explicit, a final offer of professional courtesy. It was a chance for Miller to salvage the situation. But Miller was incapable of hearing it. He laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Pay grade? You're about to be on a no-pay grade, buddy. You're going downtown." He began to pull Carter from the chair, a move that would be replayed dozens of times in court. It was at that precise moment that Officer Miller's world began to unravel. He believed he was in total control, a police officer asserting his dominance over a defiant civilian. He had no idea he was physically assaulting a federal agent on a live national security mission, and that his every action was being recorded as evidence for his own destruction. He tugged harder, expecting compliance, but instead he felt Carter's body shift, not in resistance, but in preparation. The agent was done talking. He was about to present an argument that Miller couldn't dismiss, a piece of identification that would act as a wrecking ball to the officer's entire life. With a final contemptuous tug, Officer Miller attempted to haul Agent Carter from his seat. But instead of the expected compliance of a cowed civilian, he met the rooted stillness of a man in absolute control. At precisely 3:51 p.m., as documented by the timestamp on the cafe's point-of-sale camera, the entire dynamic of power in the room inverted itself. "You are under arrest," Miller repeated, his voice strained with effort. "I need to see some identification, now." He believed this was the final move in his aim, a demand that would lead to a driver's license, a name to run, and a charge that would stick. He was catastrophically wrong. Agent Carter, moving with an unhurried, deliberate grace that was in itself an act of defiance, reached not for his back pocket, but for the sleek leather briefcase beside his chair. He unlatched it, retrieved a fine-grained leather wallet, and from it produced his credentials. He didn't just hand them over, he presented them, holding the open bifold in a steady hand for the officer to see. The document was unmistakable. The deep blue background, the golden seal of the United States Department of Justice, the bold lettering spelling out Federal Bureau of Investigation, and beneath it, his photograph next to the title, Special Agent. The counter-camera zoom lens, triggered by the manager's silent activation of a panic button, captured the moment in forensic detail. For a heartbeat, Miller's brain simply refused to process the information. His eyes darted from the photo to Carter's face and back again. Denial, thick and suffocating, flooded his features. "This can't be real," he muttered, the words caught by his own lapel microphone. He saw not a federal agent, but an elaborate trick, a prop designed to mock his authority. He laughed, a brittle, panicked sound. That's a good one, a real good one. Where'd you get that? The internet? You think a fake badge is going to get you out of this? You just upgraded from disorderly conduct to impersonating a federal officer. In that single, fatally arrogant decision, Brian Miller crossed a line from which there was no return. He had been presented with irrefutable truth and had chosen to reject it in favor of his own prejudice. He stepped back, pulling out his radio. "Dispatch, this is 3 Adam 7. I have a 1094 at the Gilded Bean, 14th and Elm. Subject is a black male approximately 6 feet, impersonating a federal officer, requesting immediate backup." The call was completed. The police were on their way. The radio call was an irrevocable act, a digital flare shot into the sky that could not be taken back. Officer Brian Miller stood with the radio still in his hand, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He believed he had cornered his suspect, exposing a fraud and reasserting his dominance. He was the hero of his own story, a vigilant cop putting a pretentious criminal in his place. He was entirely unaware that the high-definition lens of the counter-facing camera was capturing his expression not as one of triumph, but as the final, damning portrait of a career in its death throes. Special Agent James Carter, in contrast, had not moved. His posture remained one of relaxed readiness. His credentials were still held in his open hand, not as a plea, but as a statement of fact waiting for a competent authority to recognize it. He had presented the truth, and it had been rejected. The situation was now out of his hands and had escalated beyond the confines of the coffee shop. His mission was compromised, but a new, unscheduled objective had taken its place: to serve as a calm, unblinking witness to the self-immolation of Officer Brian Miller. The other patrons in the cafe were locked in a state of suspended animation. The woman with the phone had not lowered her device. Its red recording light was a tiny, accusatory eye. The older gentleman had his newspaper completely forgotten on his lap. Even the young manager, who had initially been frozen by fear, now watched with a dawning sense of clarity, understanding that the man in the uniform was not the one in the right. The audio from the cafe's security system captured the suffocating silence that followed Miller's radio call, a silence punctuated only by the officer's heavy breathing and the distant, almost imperceptible hum of the espresso machine. Miller, misinterpreting the quiet as fear and submission, felt a surge of adrenaline. He gestured with his free hand at the FBI credentials. "Put that toy away. You're in real trouble now, pal. Falsifying a federal ID is a serious offense. We're talking hard time." Each word was a shovelful of dirt on his own professional grave. He was no longer just an officer making a mistake. He was actively fabricating a federal charge, an act the Department of Justice would later review with microscopic and unforgiving scrutiny. Agent Carter slowly, methodically closed the leather bifold containing his credentials. He didn't put it away, but placed it face down on the table next to his laptop, a piece of evidence now logged and waiting. He then looked directly at Officer Miller, his expression unreadable, and spoke with chilling finality. "Officer, your actions from the moment you approached this table have been recorded by at least 3 cameras, including your own body-worn device, which I trust is active. Every word you have spoken has been documented. You have been given the truth, and you have chosen to call it a lie. The consequences for that choice are now yours, and yours alone, to bear." There was no anger in his voice, only the flat, cold tone of a man stating an indisputable equation. At that precise moment, the faint, distant cry of a siren began to weave its way through the ambient noise of the city. It was a sound that grew steadily, a rising crescendo of institutional response. To Brian Miller, it was the sound of cavalry, the validation of his authority, the arrival of his brothers in blue who would help him subdue this arrogant impersonator. He smiled, a genuine, confident smile. "That's the music of your new reality, champ." It was a fatal miscalculation. That siren was not a signal of his victory. It was the procedural soundtrack to his own ruin, a formal announcement that the wheels of a justice far more powerful and exacting than he could possibly comprehend were now turning, irrevocably, in his direction. Officer Miller just sealed his own fate. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to see the moment his backup arrives and his entire world comes crashing down. You won't want to miss the fallout. The wail of the approaching sirens grew from a distant cry to an overwhelming presence, reflecting off the glass facade of the Gilded Bean before the patrol car, a standard Ford Police Interceptor, pulled sharply to the curb at exactly 3:56 p.m. The arrival was captured from 3 distinct angles: the cafe's main security camera, the phone still recording in the patron's hand, and most critically, the 2 Axon Body 3 cameras that activated the moment the car doors opened. The footage from the body cam of Sergeant Marcus Davis, a 25-year veteran with tired eyes that had seen every kind of street-level foolishness, provides the most damning perspective. He exited the driver's side, his rookie partner, Officer Smith, emerging from the passenger side, his movements still stiff with the formal caution of the academy. Sergeant Davis's initial assessment of the scene was swift and professional. He saw his officer, Brian Miller, standing with a look of smug triumph. He saw the other patrons, their faces a mixture of tension and rapt attention. And he saw the man at the table, James Carter, who was the very picture of unnatural calm in the eye of a storm. Miller immediately moved to intercept his supervisor. "Sarge, glad you're here. This guy," he started, pointing a thumb back at Carter, "is impersonating a Fed. Got a fake ID and everything. Tried to intimidate me." Sergeant Davis didn't even break stride. His protocol was to assess the primary subject first, not to take the word of an officer who was visibly agitated. He walked past Miller as if he were a piece of furniture and stopped a respectful distance from Agent Carter's table. "May I see that, sir?" he asked, his tone neutral, a standard procedural request. Carter simply nodded and slid the credentials across the polished wood. The moment Sergeant Davis picked them up, the entire situation fractured. His hands, accustomed to the feel of thousands of documents, immediately registered the authentic weight and texture. His eyes, trained to spot forgeries, recognized the holographic overlay, the microprinting, and the specific security laminate used exclusively by the Department of Justice. There was no doubt, no hesitation. It was real. The shift in his demeanor was seismic. His posture, once relaxed and authoritative, snapped to a rigid, formal attention. His eyes lifted from the ID to Carter's face, and the neutral tone in his voice was replaced by one of profound and immediate deference. "Special Agent Carter," he said, the words clipped and clear, recorded with perfect fidelity by his lapel microphone. "Sergeant Marcus Davis, Metropolitan PD. My sincerest apologies for this disturbance. Sir, are you on official business? Is your operational security at risk?" The validation was absolute, public, and devastating. Officer Miller, standing just behind his sergeant, froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving a pasty gray mask of disbelief. The smirk that had been tattooed on his lips moments before vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed horror as he finally, catastrophically understood. Sergeant Davis's focus remained locked on Agent Carter, completely ignoring the officer whose reckless actions had created this mess. He was now operating under a different set of rules, not as a local cop managing a disturbance, but as a representative of a municipal department that had just interfered with a federal agent. The legal and jurisdictional implications were enormous, and he knew it. "Sir, what do you require?" Davis asked, his voice low and urgent. "Do you need this location secured? Do you need us to remove these civilians? We can have this street locked down in 5 minutes." He was offering to salvage the situation, to mitigate the damage his subordinate had caused, treating Carter not as a citizen or a suspect, but as the ranking officer on scene. Agent Carter finally moved, slowly closing his laptop. "That won't be necessary, Sergeant," he replied, his voice still a model of control. "My primary operational concerns have been compromised by this officer's actions. The priority has now shifted." He then looked past Davis, his gaze landing on the now trembling Brian Miller. "Your officer physically assaulted me and has attempted to obstruct a federal investigation. This is now a federal matter." The words landed like hammer blows. Every syllable was a nail in the coffin of Miller's career. The rookie, Officer Smith, looked from his sergeant's grim face to Miller's crumbling composure, his own body cam recording a masterclass in what not to do. Finally, Sergeant Davis turned, his movements slow and deliberate, to face Miller. The weariness in his eyes had been replaced by a cold, contained fury. "Miller," he said, his voice barely a whisper, but carrying the weight of a death sentence. "What exactly did you do?" Miller stammered, his mind scrambling for a defense that didn't exist. "Sarge, He looked suspicious. The ID, He couldn't finish. The excuses withered in the face of the stark reality before him. Davis cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Did you place your hands on this agent?" The question was not an inquiry. It was a formality. Miller's terrified silence was the only answer required. Sergeant Davis pointed to an empty table near the counter. "Officer Miller, you will unholster your service weapon slowly and place it on that table. You will then give me your badge and your radio. You will wait in the back of my patrol car. You will not speak another word." The command was a public stripping of his authority. In front of the patrons he had tried to intimidate and the federal agent he had assaulted, Brian Miller was disarmed and disgraced. The metallic clack of his Glock pistol hitting the wooden table echoed in the silent coffee shop. It was the sound of a life imploding, a final, definitive punctuation mark on a 20-year career that had just been obliterated by an irreversible act of prejudice. The fallout from the incident at the Gilded Bean was not a slow burn. It was a detonation, with the legal and administrative shrapnel tearing through every facet of Brian Miller's life. The process of his undoing was as methodical and documented as the evidence that condemned him. Before Sergeant Davis had even finished filing his initial report, a priority notification had been flagged at the highest levels of the Metropolitan Police Department and simultaneously routed to the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility and the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. The wheels of a multi-agency response began to turn with terrifying speed. The internal affairs investigation was a mere formality. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. 3 separate video angles, crystal clear audio from multiple sources, including Miller's own body cam, and sworn testimony from Agent Carter, Sergeant Davis, and 3 civilian witnesses. The IA panel, convened within 72 hours, delivered a unanimous verdict. The sustained charges included gross misconduct, abuse of authority under color of law, violation of Departmental Policy 304.11 regarding unlawful detention, and a specific charge of discriminatory policing based on racial bias. His termination was effective immediately. With the stroke of a pen, his 20-year career, his identity, and his future were erased. The financial consequences began to cascade immediately. His final paycheck was withheld pending administrative review, and his health benefits were terminated at the end of the month. The most devastating blow was the forfeiture of his pension. Under the provisions of the D.C. Police and Firefighters Retirement and Disability Act, an officer terminated for felonious conduct and attempting to unlawfully arrest a federal agent certainly qualified, forfeits all rights to their pension. The projected lifetime value of this loss was calculated by forensic accountants to be just over $2,500,000. But this was only the beginning of the financial reckoning. The Department of Justice, acting on behalf of Agent Carter, filed a civil rights lawsuit in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, citing a violation of his Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure and his 14th Amendment right to equal protection. The lawsuit, case number 1-23-01874, became a public spectacle. The video evidence went viral. Miller's defense was non-existent. His attorney attempted to argue that he perceived a legitimate threat, but under cross-examination he could not articulate a single factual basis for this perception beyond Agent Carter's race and appearance. The court granted a summary judgment. In her ruling, the judge described Miller's actions as a reprehensible abuse of public trust and a stain on the badge. The final judgment was a staggering $1,500,000 in compensatory and punitive damages. To cover his mounting legal fees and the initial payments on the judgment, Miller was forced to liquidate every asset he owned. His suburban home, his Ford F-150, his small investment portfolio, all of it was consumed by the financial inferno he had ignited. These costs, meticulously tracked, amounted to an additional $250,000. The total quantifiable